Welcome to Impact Pasadena. I'm Hoyt Hillsman, and I'm delighted to have as a guest today Councilmember Andy Wilson from District 7 in Pasadena. You know, in the previous segment, we were talking a little bit about the broad strokes and issues of development, but let's talk a little bit more about some of the details, some of the projects that are coming up, and things, the challenges that are facing the city in terms of this dynamic development that we're talking about.
Sure, and so we have the general plan, which sets kind of the 20-year kind of framework for development. And that gets drilled down to specific plans, which really create the feel of how development will happen. And as we were describing last time, that development is concentrated in the central district, kind of the urban core. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just as important, right? Having the right caps and, you know, nice that transit's going to be, but what does it look and feel like? And as you know, I'm a walker and a biker, and that's a much better way to kind of feel the sense of the city. And it's really important that we get that right. So the specific plans allow us to do that. And they look at things like, you know, setbacks, massing, building heights, things that create the urban sense. And I think we have some real work to do there as well. Just like the general plan enlisted lots of community input, I really think this is an opportunity. I heard this when I was, running, door to door canvassing, that people are concerned about how some of these projects are coming together, and I share that concern. And making sure we have a sense of space, right? Mm-hmm. We don't want this kind of deep valley of buildings and narrow sidewalks, and if you have a narrow sidewalk on a busy street, who would want to walk on that, right? You feel like you're gonna get killed. Yeah. So getting that kind of narrative and that kind of specific zoning right in each district is super important. We have authorized, I think it's $5 or $6 million over the next 3 years to go through these 8 specific plans and kind of figure out those details. And I'm going to tell you, I'm eager to walk with staff and residents and say, why does this feel? How does this feel to you? Because we have buildings, and some are better than others. So we have kind of a palette to kind of see how our gut reacts, and then codify what's working and what's not working. So these specific plans are really a really important opportunity for people to have their voices heard, and those will be developed in the next 3 years. So that's kind of a planning document. Yeah. The next generation, that kind of granularity, and then of course that regulates the projects. Right, and I'm happy, we can talk about what projects are going on, they're transformational.
Well, just in general, you hear people who are opposed to certain kinds of development, and I think responsible development is the key word. But I think it's also important, and maybe you can take this on a little bit, is why responsible growth is so important to the future of our city.
Right. I feel like our jobs as elected officials are to make sure the city maintains its preeminent status as probably one of the finest cities in America. Yeah. And standing still, someone who's been in the innovation world, doesn't allow you to do that. So the question is, how do we thoughtfully protect those things that are uniquely Pasadena, the neighborhoods and the historic resources, but how do we evolve in a way that acknowledges that there's a housing shortage? That people are going to get around in different ways. I have, as I mentioned to you in our first segment, I have an aspiration that my kids will live here. Not every young family is going to be able to spend $1 million or $2 million to live in a house in Madison Heights, but maybe they could live in a condominium complex near the Gold Line, not have a car, get downtown and mass transit, and have access to a community park. Right, so we got to think about what's moving and how do we make sure that what we offer as a city is as relevant to the next generation as it was to you and me.
Right, absolutely, and to preserve the diversity of Pasadena, not just in terms of ethnicity, but also age and things
absolutely.
Like that.
Young people coming in, one of the things that attracted me to Pasadena is its diversity. I think it's a real strength. I lived in places that were much more homogeneous, and I like I would say the tension in terms of ideas it creates. Yeah. Like if we're always in agreement all the time, there are no new ideas. Nothing clever is going to happen. And so I think having points of view and respectively exploring those is important. And diverse communities are much better at kind of keeping out of the echo chamber of each other and asking hard questions. So I want to make sure we don't become, a community of rich old people. Yeah. That we maintain that vitality, because I think that's extraordinary. Right? You can have we are one of the few places in Southern California where you can live in our, 21, 24, 23 square miles, whatever the number is, and have an incredibly enriched life, right? We're not, yeah, great, La Cañada is a great city, but if you want to go somewhere and do something, you have to go somewhere else.
Absolutely.
You and I could walk up Lake Street and take in a nice restaurant or go to the Playhouse and hop on a bike share. Pretty extraordinary, and we need to make sure that kind of unique proposition we have, that we're working hard to maintain that.
Well, I think our conversation is going to continue on development for many years to come, which is a good thing, as you point out, in terms of. But
pacing is one of those things too. Like, I get concerned. There's a lot going on right now, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. I get concerned about the rapid pace, because we have these 20-year capacity models, and if it all gets built in the first 5 or 10 years, what do you do the next 10 years? And I have to believe that these things go in cycles, right? Some of the projects that I'm seeing get built were actually projects that I saw when I was a design commissioner 10 or 12 years ago.
Right.
And then we had the Great Recession, and a whole bunch of projects never got built. The last part of our last general plan, so they're showing back up again. So the business cycle will be at work, and frankly, if it doesn't slow down, I think we have to ask ourselves whether we want to be proactive in kind of making sure that not too many projects are happening all at once, because it does impact neighborhoods and our ability to get around, and ultimately we'll end up with hitting capacity limits before that 20-year time horizon. I think about that.
We could really devote several shows to this.
We could.
Excuse me. There's a lot there. But I did want to tick off a few other issues that are facing us in the city.
Bring it on.
One of them was minimum wage, which you and I have talked about, and the city passed a minimum wage ordinance.
We did.
And it's there was a lot of disagreements and conversations about it, a lot of interest. How's it worked out so far? Kind of early to tell.
It's a little early to tell.
Yeah.
And the place that's kind of a leading indicator is Seattle, where they moved before a lot of the Southern California cities moved, and I think there's some conflicting research, and the tension is probably obvious to most people. Let's be clear, Southern California is a really expensive place to live, and at the same time, if you're a restaurant owner, and they were the ones who were probably most vociferous about pushing back on this, consumers only have a certain propensity to spend. You only can raise prices so much, and they're looking to have a certain margin, profit margin, and so their balancing act is how do I keep my restaurant open, knowing that you're not going to pay $25 for a hamburger, right? So I think our solution to that was being responsive to the community, and that diversity. We need a workforce that kind of makes the trains go on time and serves meals and cleans hotel rooms and all those things. It's just simply not possible for them to live at $8.50 or $10 an hour. I would argue that maybe $15 an hour is a big improvement, but still very, very hard to live on. But at the same point, we don't want to squeeze them out of the job market because restaurants close and people adopt automation. So that's the tension, right? Do people choose alternatives where there's less labor? So it's nice to have a high minimum wage, but if you don't have a job, it kind of doesn't matter. And so our solution, which I was happy to be part of that, is to have a midpoint check-in and see what's happening to business failures, job creation, so on and so forth, because that's really that's the negative side. At least there's risk of that. Yeah. I think it's too early to tell. We just went to the second ratchet. I think it's now $12 an hour, if I recall. Recently here in Pasadena, so it goes up to 15 over a multi-year period. So everything is a balancing act.
Well, it raises the issue that I think faces many, particularly cities in America, which is the divide in our country between the folks who are struggling and the folks who are more comfortable. I can think of a couple issues that are where Pasadena faces this. Housing is one. Sure. You've mentioned it. Housing for low income, housing for middle class, for young people. and then homelessness, which has become part of that issue.
Absolutely.
So it's a bundle of things. What's your take on it? I know we're grappling with it as a society, but what's your thought?
I'm sure I can give you the perfect answer in 3 minutes.
Good, Andy. That's all you got.
These are complex issues, and affordable housing. We have inclusionary housing ordinances, so when you build new construction, they're required to build 15% of affordable or very, very affordable housing. We're contemplating increasing that percentage around light rail. And I think that's good in the sense that it secures housing. We don't want again, I think having diversity of population is important. I do get concerned about what has been called the donut hole, right? Like we're going to sequester affordable housing, and then what that does to some extent is increase the market rate housing because it's a subsidy for affordable. So now you have expensive housing and inexpensive housing. What about middle class housing?
Yeah.
So there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
Clearly, the more housing you have, it's a supply and demand dynamic, the more affordable it will be. But we can't solve that problem. In Pasadena individually, it's a California problem.
Although it does link into the development issues that you talk about.
It does, absolutely does.
Yeah.
And I saw an interesting statistic in the journal last year. If you go back 20 years ago, the average price of a home in California was 150% of median price in the United States. Mm-hmm. It's now 350%. Yeah. And it's 600% in Pasadena. So this affordability gap, like you can't even you have somebody who's middle income, imagine if they're moving from Iowa or St. Louis coming to LA, even people who have good jobs. Yeah. There's no simple answer. I do think it's worth talking about homelessness because as somebody who thinks about our community, you can't help think about the people who are the least fortunate. Certainly, working people who are making a living wage is important, but imagine if you don't have a home. Yeah. As you can probably tell, I have a huge amount of pride for our city. I think we have, once again, I feel, as I said in our last segment, I feel like we won the jackpot by living here. But it can't help pull on your heartstrings around looking at the 580 people who are homeless and are chronically homeless in our city. There's kind of a double-edged sword from that. I think not only do these poor people or these people not have a place to live, a place to go home, but they also have secondary effects in terms of their camping out in parks, so that impedes the ability for families to use parks, or maybe hanging out at mass light rail stations. So there's kind of a quality of life impact to people who are just trying to, who are living their everyday lives. So I think homelessness needs to be a priority, and I'm happy to say that volunteered at Union Station, do the homeless count to really understand who these people are, and otherwise it's just a number. And I'm happy to say between Measure H, which 66% of county voters supported, there will be a large influx of resources. Clearly having the housing for them, and we're fortunate in the city of Pasadena to have options for these people.
Sure. I mean, part of it,
pushing it in through the system will be important, right?
Yeah.
And people, I'd say the last thing just on Measure H, the fact that we passed funding, it's going to take years, as you imagine, for it to go through the bureaucratic process, figure out what organizations, what's going to get built, and what I have, not to be a pessimist, but I think the homelessness issue will probably get worse before it gets better, because even though we're taking action for it to work through the system in terms of programs, shelters, is going to be, I'm going to be optimistic, 12, 24, 36 months.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that's actually a related and even larger issue, I think, to an extent, is that people sometimes characterize Pasadena as two cities. There's a have and a have-not element to it. And it's income, it's racial and ethnic divides, it's our undocumented population, it's crime in certain areas. And I know that this has been, it's education to a certain degree, public education. And I know that this has been a decades-long issue. But let's try to unpack it a little bit. Let's talk about the immigration issue, first of all. I mean, I know that the city kind of tiptoed up to the sanctuary city issue and then didn't, which I think probably, in my view, was a wise decision. But at the same time embraced our citizens and their safety. So let's talk a little bit about immigration and where we are with that.
So as I told you in the last segment, one of the selection criteria for me when we came to Pasadena was having a diverse community, and socioeconomically diverse, ethnically diverse, and immigration and kind of creating an environment where immigrants feel like they can participate. They're an important part of our economy. We were all at one point immigrants, and I feel like if you don't feel safe and then you don't feel like you can be a participant in that community, and there's no benefit in having a great community if you can't be part of it. And I think the city council view is we want people to feel like that as a municipality that we're protecting their right to live a full life. I think the reason that we didn't kind of go all the way to kind of sanctuary city was twofold. Mm-hmm. One is we didn't want to paint a big target on our back in terms of losing, and we don't have a huge amount of funding, but there's no sense of being, the target of 140 character tweets and, sessions and so on and so forth. Yeah. But I think more importantly, there is in terms of authority, ICE has a right to operate anywhere in the country. Right. Whether we like it or not, we don't have to be part of that, and we've said we wouldn't be. But if I tell you you're in a sanctuary city, you may get a false sense of security, and because PPD's not going to kind of give you a hard time or ask for your papers. Right. But there's no way we could prevent federal agents from not showing up at your doorstep. Yeah. So you could imagine the narrative that Pasadena declares itself a sanctuary city, and then Hoyt-Hillsman gets picked up the next day. It's like you got lied to. Right. So I think there was kind of a communication aspect of that to say that we're not immigration enforcement, but we can't really control those who are. Yeah, exactly. And so that's why we kind of, I think, took that strategy. But I think, having lived in many international cities, I find that kind of richness of our immigrant population to be a real asset. It has cost, adds complexity and so on and so forth. Right. But that makes the city an interesting place to be.
Crime. Mm-hmm. We've had some terrible incidents in Pasadena in recent times, and I think crime, you probably agree, is a complicated issue as well. There's socioeconomic issues too, and policing issues. What are some of the things that we can do, citizens and the city can do to address this, which I think is partly a result of the divide that we find in the city too?
Right. These are not easy questions.
No, I know, Andy.
Having a good police department is really dealing with a symptom. Uh-huh. Right, and we have to deal with the symptoms because these are kind of issues that are from societal issues, mm-hmm. and at the end of the day, they will. We have crime in our city, and certainly being connected to mass transit has created mobility, and probably helps a flow of homelessness as well. Mm-hmm. And so I guess we can't police our way out of it. Is my point. We need to have a police force to deal with issues, but we have to ask ourselves, where does crime come from? And I think we need to make sure we're spending time on things like dealing with recidivism and educational opportunity. You talked about STEAM coders. Yeah. We got to create opportunities for people, and one of the reasons that I get enthusiastic about the innovation economy is that there are opportunities for everybody in the innovation economy. We need to kind of, through people like STEAM coders, Innovate Pasadena, and kind of having high quality jobs. What's interesting about, by the way, innovation jobs, mm-hmm. for every innovation job you bring in your city, you bring 5 more jobs at or below median income. Mm-hmm. That's called the job multiplier. Yeah. So I want to make sure that we have job opportunities for our youth. We have education that allows them to do that. Clearly, the work that PCC is doing on workforce development. We have the Small Business Administration in here. They have a satellite office. I think we're making a good effort, but it takes tenacity, and I get concerned about some of the rhetoric coming out of DC, where we're like they want to just wipe the slate and kind of live in some world that doesn't exist. We need to kind of have a vision of a community that has opportunity for everybody, and work with that and fund that, embrace people, and know that we're not going to get perfection over time, but have the moral conviction. Yep. That that's how communities work, and I think over time, we'll continue to move the needle in the right direction. And homelessness is the same way.
Well, we've discussed this, and they are complex issues. I think that the workforce development is so important. People always put a lot of emphasis on everybody going to college, which is great, or four-year colleges. But there's a big the donut hole, as you describe it, in the mid-skilled jobs. I know in my particular area in media. There's some estimates that almost a third of the new jobs, particularly mid-skilled jobs, are in the roughly arts-related areas, which includes entertainment, video games, fashion, design, advertising. And that's another lack that we have.
Right.
And we have the resources. We have Art Center in Pasadena and PCC and places like that. So I'm also a fan of STEAM, which includes arts.
Yeah, of course.
So, and I think that you can comment on this. I think that it's a tricky combination, a partnership between the public, the private sector, and the educational sector to kind of pull these things together. It's not like the 60s and 70s when you had the old-time jobs where everybody was in there for, or you could get with a high school degree, you could get a good middle-class manufacturing job. And Pasadena's not immune to that. We've got a lot of advantages, I think. Well, but we're not immune to that.
And I go back to Innovate Pasadena. I mean, that is the city's just one participant, Caltech, Art Center, PCC, 35 technology companies. It is collaboration and alignment of interests in a shared vision, right? And I think...
How do you broaden that out as a city, which is in the public, and it's a different, as you know, it's a different arena. How do you bring private partnerships that really can have some impact, on the grassroots level, on the city level? Because sometimes it feels like they're operating in two different universes, the public and the private arena.
Well, once again, using a specific example of it at Pasadena, I went to the city and said, I got frustrated, right? And most people, there are a lot of not-for-profits, and usually that's a function of someone getting frustrated. In the Pasadena way, which I laud, is since a lot of us want to stay here for a long time, when we see something that needs to be fixed, we kind of ask somebody, usually it's the city, and more often than not, we don't have the answer, that we take it upon ourselves to find the solution. And when I looked at this kind of high-tech job creation, which you would argue would be economic development function, but we got 3 or 4 people in there, and they're barely doing what they can do. What I would say was good about the city, and once again I was on the recipient side, is they were happy to support. They provided the original kind of seed funding. Right now they're less than 5% of the funding, but we saw the opportunity to bring those sectors together in the city, kind of got out of the way and also supported. So I think creating those bridges.
I think Pasadena is probably one of the more, you can really be hopeful about some of these issues in Pasadena because of the way that we work things out. I can't let you go without asking you, because it's in my neighborhood, about South Lake and how's South Lake doing? Right. We see businesses come and go. Some of them are great. We see some more restaurants. What's the?
I think we want to make South Lake the credit union and mattress capital of Southern California. I keep telling people, as much as I want to see storefronts filled, please no more mattress stores and credit unions. So the history of South Lake, obviously, at one point it was the premier shopping district. And I'm going to go back, we have a South Lake Business Association, and I attend a bunch of their board meetings. I've taken it upon myself, and I would say I wish the city would do all this stuff, and people have an expectation that they are. But when we talked about the budget, they're not doing it. And so I've met with developers, retailers, and when I see a good use, I hold their hands as much as I can and try to fly air cover for them. Because I think activating South Lake, selfishly for you and me, it's kind of our most adjacent kind of shopping district. Right. And so whether it be bringing people through the Borders building, which has been vacant forever, I think they're just starting construction on a restaurant called Granville, which will be at Del Mar and Lake Street on the northeast corner.
Is part of it, I know, because there was a time before you were on the council when they were thinking about movie theaters for the Barnes & Noble building and things like that, and there's a lot of neighborhood pushback on that.
Traffic, of course.
Yeah. I mean, is that, I mean, we do have parking facilities on South Lake, but what's the real problem? Is it that it's not economically viable for some of these outfits to come in?
I don't have a clear answer to that.
Yeah.
I think part of it is defining what the district stands for.
Okay.
Okay. And and we have these business improvement districts in South Lake. When I think about it, and I got a chance to sit in their strategy session last year, is kind of neighborhood commerce and retail and restaurants.
Right.
Take your kids in the stroller. You and I walk her from the street. It's not going to be destination. I mean, we have to be realistic. It's not going to be destination. But I certainly hope the Macy's is pretty good. Destination, I understand they're still doing quite well. Thank goodness, because Macy's is struggling as a chain.
Yeah.
But imagine if we lost the Macy's there, that would be a bigger hole that would make the Borders building look like it's insignificant.
Yeah.
And so I look at that as the right positioning, especially as we get people living in the Caltech neighborhood, young families who don't necessarily want to start their car, want to be able to enjoy the pedestrian mobility of our community. And then how do you build it up, kind of incrementally? And I see an architecture coming together where you have these kind of pedestrian activated little nodes, so kind of like the Pete's coffee shop, right? Then you go up and you can think where the Flemings and the coffee bean is, and you go up and you can keep working your way up.
I have to interrupt you as we wrap, but what's interesting about being a city council person is you're dealing with block by block, but you're also dealing with these large, really national, societal issues.
Immigration, homelessness.
So, it's a great challenge doing what you do, and we thank you for it.
Well, I learn every day, and these conversations actually help my thinking, so thank you for giving me an opportunity to sit with you today.
Well, thank you so much for participating and for all your service. I want to thank the audience for viewing Impact Pasadena, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Andy Wilson.
My pleasure.
This program was produced by Pasadena Media for the Arroyo Channel.